everything looks good. Come on. Does it say I'm streaming? Yes, it does. Okay, so why is... There it goes. All right, let's get to it. All right, so today is first crack at Unreal Engine, and so we'll talk some of the broad strokes of it, a little bit of the history, and then kind of the motivation for it. So let's just suppose that we are making a game, and we want to have a player, and then over here there's a door or like a gate, and then like the player can walk towards the gate, and maybe there's like over here a secret passage that he's got to find so that he can then find a key that opens the door. Okay, great. Right, perfectly reasonable problem. So if we were sort of thinking from the perspective of the door, right, what would the code for the door look like if I were to sort of draw it as a flow chart? Right, so like under what circumstances should the door open? Yeah. Yeah, if the player's got the key, okay? Also though, what I probably would have is I don't want it to open if the player has the key, but also if the player's standing right in front of it, right? Like, you don't want the door to open the second that the player gets the key, right? Now, maybe you'd want like a button that if you step on it opens the door, but that's different, right? Yeah? Okay, so let's just run with the sort of key situation, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to imagine that there's sort of an invisible object that's in front of the door, okay? And in the terms of make code, right, that would be a sprite or a tile map coordinates or something that from maybe a visual perspective was invisible. Okay, so one of the colors in the palette when you guys were Okay, Tyler, you should be able to hear me now. I think my microphone accidentally got turned off. Not sure how I did that. Okay, sorry. Okay, so like in make code, this would be something like on sprite of kind, player overlap sprite of kind, blue region or whatever, right? And we use stuff like that because, for example, you wouldn't want it to be the case that if you shot the door, it opened, right? Or maybe you do. There's instances where that you might want that. Okay. All right, you want to know how to get banned? Well, there's certain words in the English language that if you type them, I will ban you for using them. And might get you also kicked out of the college if you pick appropriately, right? He's on Twitch asking how he can get banned. The other thing you could do would be like spam me with Bitcoin, like Bitcoin stuff, or like which stock to buy other than GameStop, or post naughty photos in the chat. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so the overlap thing, right? So in MakeCode, you could have a situation where you want something to happen only if it's a particular kind of object that overlaps, okay? Now, I've written it here on object overlap blue zone deliberately differently than we did in Make. going off. You probably can't see, oh, because I didn't switch the input. Okay, so this is the ship that you were on that crashed, and like it's this big open world, and there's a waterfall, and if you fall down, you die, or not. But yeah, we were just all blown away by the graphics back then. So let me flash forward a little bit more. Where is it? You know, okay, forget this, because so, we're not watching another freaking ad. Okay, so there's a real famous, or I guess at the time it would have been famous, everybody was like, oh, what'd you think about the hallway? So you go into this hallway, and then you go to the end of it, and there's like an item, and then you're coming back out, and the door that's at the end of the hallway where you came in just closes. And then the lights start turning out, one after another, starting at the door and getting closer to you. So you're like, oh, crap. And then this big monster comes out of the darkness, and you have to fight it. So how was that all programmed? It was a pain in the ass the way you had to program stuff like that back then. And as Unreal Engine matured, so let me back up a minute. Okay, Tyler, sorry, the audio went out again. I don't know what the deal is. Oh, the battery is dying. That's the problem. Okay. I'll go get some new batteries. I'll be right back while this is loading. All right. Please hold. See what kind it takes. Double A. Sorry about that. All right, Tyler, that should be better. Let's double check the audio. Testing. Okay. All right, so Tyler, hopefully it won't keep cutting in and out because that was really annoying. Okay, so if you launch the engine, then you'll get this menu here. It'll have any projects that you've already had up at the top, but you can also click new projects, and there's various categories. We'll probably mostly use the game one, at least for now. So we'll do that. And then there's templates for getting started, and here you basically pick, okay, well, what kind of game template do you want to use? Could include blank, right, where there's absolutely nothing there and you've got to start from scratch. But for the most part, we'll use one of the actual templates. So there's puzzle game template, there's a rolling game template where your character is like a ball, third person, top down, first person, side scroller in two different kinds, vehicle games, VR specific stuff, right? So there's lots of blueprints to start with. Just for sake of demonstration, we'll do the first person one today, here, okay? And then I'll hit next, and then it'll ask me a few questions. So do I want to use this as Blueprint or C++? We'll start with Blueprint. You can mix Blueprint and C++, but for the most part, I want to stick with Blueprint this semester, just because getting into C++ is kind of in the weeds. And then a few other things. So basically, just use the default settings here. You can always edit these later, but yeah, okay. And then you have to decide where do you want to store the project and what do you want to call it, okay? So this presents sort of a problem, though. If you're doing this on your own computer, where should you store it? Well, that's whatever. Just use whatever it uses, okay? No big deal. And you could, of course, call the project whatever you want. Now, the project file, okay, this works a little bit differently than something like a Word document, right? So if you type a paper, it's going to be a single Word document, a single file. A project in Unreal is really a folder containing a whole bunch of different files. Art assets. Each one of your blueprints has its own file, right? So it's a big folder worth of stuff. So if you want to copy this from one place to another, you don't just copy a single file, you copy the entire bloody folder, okay? The other issue is, what about if you're working on this on the library computers, which we will. We'll do our first library day Thursday. What's the problem with library computers? Yeah. Yeah, when you reboot them, everything's gone. Okay, now there is one exception to that, namely the machines back in the Ed Tech Center have a drive that doesn't wipe when you reboot. Okay, it's called like the project drive or whatever. And so what you'd want to do is you'd want to put your project on there rather than on the regular drive, okay? So that if you come back to it later, or like let's say the power just goes out, you don't lose everything, okay? But there's one more problem there, which is let's say that you on Thursday are doing your work on iMac A, and you come back the next day and somebody is sitting and using iMac A. What do you do? Give up? Yeah? Fight him? Okay. Yeah. Well, do I have any betas in this section? Nope. Okay. Well, I did in the last one. He was like, you tell him to move. And I'm like, that's a pretty beta answer, right? A more beta answer would be you physically move him, but whatever. Okay, so, right, you're sort of hosed because it's not, you can't get to the drive on the computer you're not sitting in front of, okay? So, what's the solution to that problem, or a solution to that problem? Well, okay, yes. What's another solution? Yeah? Yeah, if it's networked. I don't know how they've got them set up, but yeah, theoretically you could, yeah. Yeah, you put it on a flash drive or on box or something. Okay, now do not work on, so if you put the file on box, don't run and open it while it's in box. Box can be kind of ornery with when you're working on a file that is simultaneously being stored on box. I've run into that before. But there's another, right, you could just throw it on a USB stick when you're done and carry that with you, right? Well, what does that mean you need? Oh, well, if only your professor had a box full of them. So, how many of you guys know Rob Shook, class of '83? Nobody? Heard of him? Okay, class of '83, he works for IBM. He called me maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and he's like, would you happen to have a use for like a crap ton of USB sticks? And I'm like, why, yes, I do. So he sent me this box full of USB sticks, and he sent me 25, which is perfect, because there's 24 of you and 1 of me. Okay? So everybody gets a USB stick. It's sort of like Oprah Winfrey Day, right? You get a USB stick, and you get a USB stick. All right, so what you got inside there is a USB thumb drive, 16 gigabytes, and it has a little stylus, tablet stylus attached at the other end, which is kind of cool. And there should be 2 left. Yep, and Mr. Ramsey, I have yours. I can give it to you whenever. Okay, so Gucci. So now none of you can say, I don't have a USB stick, because I just handed you all one. Don't freaking lose them, okay? All right, anyway, so let's just name this FPS Demo 2, create project, and then it'll open it up. Now, the very first time you open Unreal Engine or a project within it, particularly, well, either on a Mac or PC, it may take a while to load at the beginning. The other thing you may see is over at the bottom right, there may be a thing that says compiling shaders, and like starts with like a list of 5,000 things that it's doing, and then it ramps down to 0. Just let it run, okay? Probably a good thing actually would be like fire it up, go let it start working, go and get dinner, come back, and it should be finished, okay? You only really have to do that the first time that it runs, but yeah. Okay, so here's the starting layout. And in fact, let me put this on the other screen also. Okay, the starting layout to the environment. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to have you guys do for Thursday is kind of, well, how did the first little course on the online learning thing go? Right, pretty straightforward. Okay, there's lots of other ones, and we're going to use some of them periodically. The one for Thursday, and I'll put a link up on Canvas, is called Your First Hour with Unreal Engine, and it's basically just going to kind of walk you through what are all the different things that you're seeing. What do we call this? Well, it's called the content browser. I know that should come as a real shock. But what are all these different things called, and what are their purposes? Okay, and then it'll sort of walk you through the very, very beginnings of making something super simple. Okay, okay, so fine. What I want to kind of talk about today, though, is just to give us a taste of how the programming, the idea behind Blueprint will sort of look. Okay, so let me just show you how the template starts. What's in the template? Okay, so if I hit the play button, this runs basically the simulator version, and it runs my game in this little window. Okay, and there's not much to it. I can move around, I can jump, I can shoot, right? And when I shoot, it creates these little spheres, okay, that bounce around. Okay, that's kind of cool. And if I shoot one of these boxes, it simulates the physics. Right, so, you know, I can shoot and they'll tumble, and that's kind of cool, and great, okay? That's it, right? That's all that's in the starting template, but it's enough to kind of get going. All right, so then I'll hit escape and get out of the simulator. All right, so what I want to kind of talk about are, to start talking about are the objects and the code and things that sort of go underneath it. Okay, so one of the major differences between this and MakeCode is when you were coding in MakeCode, there was only one window of code, right? And as your project got more and more complicated, it became a little bit messy because there was shit all over the place, right? There was no way to organize it beyond what it had, okay? Now, contrast that with, how many of you guys had seen Scratch before? We didn't use it, okay? In Scratch, when you create a sprite, each sprite can have its own little window of code attached to it, okay? Which meant that you could keep some things much more organized, but it meant for that other things were a pain in the butt, right? So it's sort of a trade-off. Unreal Engine is organized the latter way. When you create a sprite or any other object, okay, it has its own little place where you can put code that goes with that object, and other objects can have their own code, okay? Now, this means that you have a different organizational problem. You have to know where things are going to be, but since you're the one making it, like, don't be stupid about it, and things will be fine, okay? So let's look at, in this case, the template comes with some predefined objects, okay? And all of these are going to be under blueprints, okay? So there's only 4 of them down there, okay? Because this is a simple template, we don't have much in here. We have the first-person character, the first-person game mode, the first-person HUD, and the first-person projectile, okay? The game mode and the HUD don't have anything in them right now. They're basically just placeholders. Okay, the HUD would be, what would you use a HUD for? What does HUD stand for anyway? Yeah. Yeah, okay, so it stands for Housing and Urban Development. No, it doesn't. It's heads-up display. Okay, that's the other HUD. All right, so heads-up display. So that would be where you would display things like ammo counters, health bars, weapon like inventory or something along those lines. Switching weapons, you know, you could do sort of with that. But anything that's going to be overlaid on the screen that's not actually part of the world. Okay. Right. So that's what the HUD is. There is no HUD by default in this template. Okay. There's also no information about the game mode. Okay. So there's no game here. There's no way to win. There's no way to lose. There's no other player. There's no enemies. There's no nothing, right? There's no point system. There's no keys. There's no doors. We haven't defined any of that. Okay, so the game mode right now is basically blank. The only two things that have code here are the first-person character and the first-person projectile, so the little yellow blobs that we shoot, okay? And each one has some code associated with it, and let's kind of look at that. So let's start with the first-person character, okay? All right, so if I double-click on that, it opens up a second window, and what I can see here is down the top left, I can see all objects that are part of the first-person character. Okay, so this is another difference between this and MakeCode. In MakeCode, you couldn't define compound objects, right? So you couldn't have, for example, the player, like let's say you had the player and he stuck out his sword. Well, the sword was a totally different object. It wasn't in any way directly tied to the player character. Not so in Unreal. You can organize objects sort of hierarchically. So this object, the player character, is made up of an arm and a gun and a camera. Okay, the camera defines sort of your view, how you see the world. The arm and the gun are basically where if you look through the camera, you see the arm and the gun. Where are the legs? They're not there because you can't see them. So why bother, right? Unless you were making a multiplayer game, in which case other players would have other legs, you better put the legs in, okay? So, yeah, so this is sort of, for the purposes of this template, you only actually are displaying what you need to display. Legs, the head, etc. Don't need it for if there's only a single character in the game, okay? Right. And so you see up at the top left, all of the stuff is sort of organized. And there's some stuff in there that's sort of specific for if you have a VR headset and you fired this up, it would just work. But you have to define how things are going to work for the VR headset separate from how they're going to work for just a regular controller. Which is a little annoying, but whatever. Does anybody actually have a VR headset for computer PC at all? No? Okay. A couple guys in the other section do. The VR stuff we can basically just ignore. Now, variables. Look down here. So you guys remember in MakeCode we had the local variables stuff? Or that was an extension that we could use? Variables are all local here. They're all local to a particular object, okay? And there's different kinds of variables. So you see how there's the little colors next to each one? Those colors mean things as to what kind of variable it is. Is it a number? Is it a sound? Is it, what thing is it? And then the code, you guys can't see it on the left screen, but on the right here, there's event graph. That's basically where all the code is. Okay, so let's just kind of look at, let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, for example, this little piece here, right? Input action jump. Okay, so I hit the jump key, button, whatever it is. Okay, and notice that I haven't specified here what the key is. Right? It's just, have I pressed the jump key? And then I could define in another place what button gets mapped to the jump key. Is it the space bar? By making it generic like that, this is how games that allow you to redefine your controls, how they work. Okay, okay, so if you hit the jump key, button, whatever, then what should happen if it's pressed? You should jump. What should happen if it's released? You should not jump, right? Okay, jump and stop jumping, those are pretty obvious things. That's it, right? All right, let's look at something a little bit more complicated. What should happen if you pressed the fire button? Yeah, you should launch a projectile, What else? You should, yeah, it should create a projectile, and that thing now has some physics, so it should move. You should also have, like, the gun should do like a recoil animation or something. It played the sound, right? All of those sorts of things happen, right? Okay, so let's look just sort of briefly at, what happens. If I press the fire button, okay, and then what should I do? Well, I should animate the gun, right? And this thing called montage is how you do animation. We'll talk about that later. But I also need to figure out where am I in the world and which way am I facing so that I can spawn the first-person projectile object, put it at the right spot, and give it velocity pointing in the correct direction. Okay? Now, there's a lot of details to that, so I don't care about the details right now, but that's basically the idea. Where am I? Which way am I pointing? Fire the projectile with the appropriate velocity after creating that object. Okay? So this thing right here, spawn actor, when in MakeCode, you guys remember you did like create sprite of kind blah, right? So a sprite could come into existence by being created during the program, right? That's exactly what this thing is doing. It's creating an instance of an object, in this case, the projectile object. And I say instance here because, well, we'll look at that in a second, okay? I should also play the sound. I just hit the fire button. Okay, that's cool. And sounds can have locations, right? And that makes sense because this is not something that you had to worry about with MakeCode, but in a real game, like nowadays, if I fire my gun and you're standing over there versus standing over here, it's going to sound different to you, right? You have stereo headphones. There's sort of a spatial awareness of it. If you're closer to me, then it's going to be louder than if you're further away, right? So all of those things are baked into the audio system. And so the sound needs to know not only what sound do you want to play, but where are you, okay? Play the sound, and then that's it. And then if the player hits the button again, well, then the whole thing happens again. Okay, so does that kind of make sense? All right, now, let me X out of this. And let's go to the first-person projectile and sort of look at what's going on there. All right, and again, let me zoom in. Okay. All right, is that big enough to see? Yeah, okay. Okay, so you see that red box on the left called event hit. Think of that as kind of like being the, like in MakeCode, we had different events that were, on button A pressed, or on sprite of kind blah overlap other sprite of kind other blah, right, or whatever, right? So that whole thing is when the object, okay, in this case the object is the yellow blob, okay, when that object hits something, that's when this code gets activated, okay? All right, now, what kind of things could we ask about the impact? Well, I could say, well, what did I just hit? Okay, so other comp meaning other component. What's the object I just hit? Okay, I could also say, where did this happen? Which way did the hit occur? Like the direction, whether or not I hit something or whatever. Okay, so lots of outputs can happen from here. But when I hit something, what did I just hit? Okay. Now, the English is hard. Why might I care what type of object I hit? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so if you hit a wall with the projectile, you probably want it to just bounce. okay? If you hit another enemy with it, maybe it does something different. If you hit a box, like you guys saw in there, where the boxes just started like scattering about, okay, you might want to do different things, or possibly nothing, depending on what type of object you've hit, okay? So other comp is saying, okay, you just hit something, and I'm going to give you a reference to the object you just hit. Then you could ask, well, what kind of object did I just hit? What properties does it have? Is it of a particular type, or does it have a particular property attached to it? In this case, for this particular example, the target that you, or the object that you hit, we're going to ask the question, is this a thing that has physics simulation applied to it? Yes or no? Okay. You could also say, is this thing a box? Or is this thing an enemy? Or whatever. Okay. In this case, it's just, does it have physics simulation or not? And if so, we're going to do something. And if not, we won't do anything. Okay. So, is the object a physics, does it have physics simulation, yes or no? That's a yes or no question, right? So that question returns either true or false. And in MakeCode, this was any time you did something with the pointy diamond dudes, right? An object that could return true or false, or a question, had the little pointy guys on either end, okay? In Unreal Engine, they color code the things, and so a Boolean is sort of that red line. It's a true-false thing. Okay. Then this object here, this box called branch, is basically the version of the if-then else thing from MakeCode, right? So I have a thing coming in, and it's either true or it's false. Okay? It's connected to the condition. So the condition is the thing being evaluated as true or false. If it's true, what should I do? Well, some stuff. If it's false, I maybe do some other stuff or nothing. Okay? So here, if it's true, I'm going to do the next thing in the list. Okay, so you see the little wires that are connecting everybody? Yeah? The white ones indicate the order of execution. Okay? So event hit, that happens, so then the branch will get checked. And the branch is either true or false, and then the stuff down the line will happen. Okay? So the white things, so like if I, for example, let's just say I disconnected this wire. If I ran this and started shooting, nothing would happen anymore, okay? Because I disconnected the execution node, okay? So I want to reconnect that so that it'll actually work. Okay, so did I hit something that's simulating physics? Yes or no? If yes, what do we do? Well, this particular thing is going to do add impulse at location, which is to say, if I hit, like what happens physics-wise if I hit a box with a ball? Or let's maybe take a pool table. That's a better example. Right, so if I hit one ball, the cue ball, and then I hit another ball, what happens to the other ball? It's going to move, right? And depending on how I hit it, if I hit it straight on, then maybe it does that, right? And this ball basically just sort of stops. Or if I hit it sort of side on, then they do sort of that thing, right? And if you're really good at pool, you know how to do all the cool tricks. So what I'm doing is basically transferring energy from one object to the other, okay, or momentum really. In the case of our ball, I'm going to transfer momentum to the thing that I hit, whatever it was. Okay? Then what should happen to the projectile? Well, okay, technically yes, right? Okay, so if I wanted to bounce, that's what I would program in. It's something like that. But if, let's say that this was a bullet and I hit an enemy, I should hurt the enemy, and then what should happen to the bullet object? Just disappear, right? Just destroy it, okay? So like in MakeCode, right, you can create objects, you can also destroy them. And look what we've got there. Right after we add physics to the other object, we destroy our projectile, and that's it. It's gone. Okay? Does that kind of make sense? Right, so now the details of all of this, like how do you know which blocks to put in, right? Let's think about it from the MakeCode perspective. How were the blocks organized? I mean, they were organized in MakeCode, right? There was that little menu, and they were color-coded, and you could go in and sort of see which ones you had. Picking the correct blocks is a little bit more complicated here because there's a shit ton more of them. And that's a technical term, by the way. The shit ton, it's even a metric shit ton as opposed to an imperial. No. You guys are pathetic. Okay, so there's a lot more of these different primitive blocks, and we'll have to learn kind of in different situations how do we get the ones that we're looking for. Okay. Now, here, what happened if the object was not simulating physics? Yeah. It can either go through it or bounce off, or does anything happen based on just this code right here? No, because nothing's connected to the false block. Okay? We could make a change here. We could say, well, what happens if the object that you hit is not simulating physics? What could we do? Rather than applying physics and then deleting it, what about if we just delete it, say? Okay? So I could, for example, copy and paste this and then connect the false to there. Okay? All right, now, I just made a change to the code. So this button up here, I have to recompile it. Do that, save it, and then now it'll work. So compiling is basically taking high-level code or stuff like this and turning it into what the computer actually executes, which is a big bunch of ones and zeros and stuff, okay? The compiling process will also check for errors. So this occasionally happened in MakeCode where you did something and then suddenly the simulator wouldn't run anymore, and you're like, what's going on? And then there'd be an error message, which was usually very unhelpful, right? Sort of the same idea. If there's an error, it'll pop up down there at the bottom, and then you have to figure out what the problem is. Okay, but anyway. All right, so now we just made it so that if I shoot the box, okay, fine. But what happened before? So let me actually, let me go back to this, and let me disconnect what we just did. Oops. Okay, so I just disconnected that node, so I have to recompile, resave, and let's go back into the game. What happens if I shoot the wall? Yeah, it bounced. Okay. Where was that defined? Well, it wasn't in the sphere part. Okay, it was defined somewhere else, potentially. Okay, so if we hit escape, let me go to the wall. Okay, if we look at the wall object, then the physics simulation, you see this tick box right here, is false. Okay, so what should happen to the ball if it hits a physics, something with physics off? Well, right now, nothing. Sorry, we didn't tell the ball to do anything special. Okay, so the fact it bounced was basically dealt with elsewhere. If I turned this on, okay, or went in, so let me turn that on and see what happens. Oops. Oh. Okay, so what happened is the wall basically fell because it had gravity applied to it also. Um, where am I? There we go. Okay, where was the wall that I was messing with? It was this one that I messed with? No. Okay, so simulate physics, but somewhere in here I've also simulated gravity. Yeah, enable gravity. All right, so let me turn off enable gravity, but turn on simulate physics. Okay, so what's happening there is that the wall was actually, it was slightly overlapping another object, and so that's why it started moving. And then, okay, this is a little ridiculous, but, right. And it's floating away because the physics is being simulated except for gravity, right? So you can, turn off gravity, and then it disappeared, I think. Oh, no, it's still there. Okay. It might disappear if it floats out of the world or goes sort of out of bounds of my world or off the screen, whatever. Okay. So that's kind of ridiculous, but also cool, right? So probably didn't want to do that. Let's go back and let's put physics back on for this guy, or sorry, physics off for those two. And now let's try it again. Okay, now we're good. Right, our walls don't go anywhere. Okay, but if I went back into the ball and I reconnect this, okay, then what's going to happen when I hit the wall now? It's just going to disappear. That's it. Okay. And so I need to recompile and save. And so if we play that, then, right, now they just disappear. Okay. And which one you want to happen, well, that kind of depends on you, right, and the game. Let's say, for example, we were making, and I think this may actually have used Unreal Engine, I'm not sure. How many of you guys have Switches? Yeah? Splatoon? Any of you guys play Splatoon? A little bit? Yeah? Okay, so what's sort of the idea in Splatoon? Basically, yeah, it's like paintball right? So you're running around, you're shooting other people, but it's just sort of paint blobs instead of actual guns, and so it's not as violent or gory or anything. Well, if we were making sort of a Splatoon-y kind of thing here, I might want to delete the object and then have something that like applies a paint splotch to the wall. Okay, and you can do that actually. It's you can sort of overlay stuff. Yeah, so in this case, the question that we were asking is it a physics simulating object or not? Okay, maybe we want to be a little bit more specific than that. Is it a decoration box, yes or no? Okay, as opposed to is it an enemy, yes or no? Because if I hit an enemy with this thing, what should I probably want to have happen? The ball disappears, but then maybe I damage the enemy somehow. But I'm not going to make the enemy get like knocked back. I mean, maybe I do want that. Maybe that'd be kind of cool. I don't know of any games that are like that. Well, unless like you get hit with a rocket launcher or something. Yeah. Yes, totally. Okay. So for example, how much impulse we're applying to the other object is something that we could tweak, right? And for example, let's imagine there's plenty of games where like if you hit the left mouse button, it just shoots. But if you hit the right mouse button, it like charges up your shot. So we could, for example, make something where if you did that, it charged up your shot, and then you fired like a gigantic ball at something that if it hit, it would like knock it way, way harder than if it was just the small guy. Yeah, totally can do that, right? Now, how you program it's another matter, but yeah, pretty much anything you can think of, you can do here. How? Okay, there might be some details there, right? But yes, it is possible to do something like that. Okay. The other thing is that each of these objects, so this is kind of neat. Let's look at the boxes, for example. Okay. So let me go out of this. So we've got this little box over there. We've also got this bigger box over there. Okay. So let's look at the properties of the little box. Okay, collision presets, blah, blah, blah. There's one of the options in here somewhere that has its mass. I don't remember where it is. Constraints. Okay, I don't remember where it is, but it's here somewhere. You can set the mass of objects, and oh, here it is, mass in kilograms, 442 point blah blah blah. Okay, now if I click on this big box, notice it's way bigger. Okay, and so why was it that the bigger box didn't recoil as much? Well, because it had more mass, right? So we could configure, in this case, I think probably what it's doing is it's just using the volume of the object because it's just a cube, right? Sort of imagining it's of uniform density, and so the bigger it is, the more mass it's going to have. But we could override this and specify a specific mass. So like, let's just take that big box, for example, and let me set its mass in kilograms to, let me just say something ridiculous like 2. Okay, so what happens when I shoot this one? Or what should happen? Right, because it had so little mass that I was imparting such enough energy that it just, you know, and I don't know, where is it? Maybe it disappeared. I don't know, okay? Whereas if I go back in and I do something ridiculous, like I make it the weight of Tyler Ramsey's mom, then right, then it basically doesn't move at all. Right? Do you like that one, Tyler? Tyler, you with us? Okay, anyway, you guys get the idea, right? I mean, puerile humor aside, yeah, you guys should never mess with me. Never mess with McKinney. I've been trash talking longer than you guys have been alive. Okay, anyway, so yeah, so all of these sorts of properties are editable on a per object basis, okay? And this is kind of something that we'll talk about when we start to create our own objects. Okay, you can have properties that are instance editable. Okay, what I mean by instance editable here is the projectile. Okay, that's think of the projectile, the little yellow blob that's in my down at the bottom. That is not a particular projectile. It's sort of what should the general category of projectile look like, and then I can have multiple instances of it. So I could have this projectile that I fired and this other projectile that I fired. And each of those could have some properties that they inherit from their parent class and other properties that are specific to them. So for example, here, the parent properties would be, what size is it? What color is it? In this example. The local properties could be, well, where is it spawned in the world, right? If I fire 2 projectiles, I don't want both projectiles being exactly at the same place. They shouldn't be, right? They should be relative to wherever in the world they got created. Maybe I make it so that, like, I don't know, there's no reason I couldn't do this, where every time you hit you create a projectile, it picks a random color and applies a random color to the ball. Why not, right? So things can be instance editable, and when you create a class, you're creating sort of the the generic parent version of it. Okay. All right. So we'll talk obviously more on Thursday. So I'll have a short assignment for you guys to do another one of these little online learning things. I'll put the link up on Canvas. The other thing is, where will we be? Library, back at the Ed Tech Center. And try and get there a little bit early because it takes a while to boot up the machines in Unreal Engine and get all your windows and crap open. So try and come at least 5 minutes early if you can. We'll see you there. We probably won't see Tyler because he'll be like, oh, McKinney's insulting my mom, so I'm not going to class. All right, see you guys later.